I kind of want to talk about like what are the actual divisions and factions of the ruling class, and how should socialists maneuver within this under a coming Biden and Harris administration.
Well, I think the way the divisions play out, I think there's a very good book that I read. It's by Carl Oglesby, who was a leader of Students for a Democratic Society. And in the 1970s, he published a book called The Yankee and Cowboy War. And it's a very good book, and it talks about the 1960s and the political crisis as a fight between the Yankees, or the Eastern establishment, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Carnegies, the entrenched, wealthy families of New England, versus he refers to the cowboys, that being the weapons manufacturers, the folks out west, the Texas oil men that are in competition with the big super major oil companies, that the lower levels of capital, he calls them the cowboys, and that this is the divide, right? And that Nixon was for the Cowboys, and the Democrats were for the Yankees and the Eastern establishment. And I think that's pretty accurate in assessing the American political divide during that time. Things have changed because Silicon Valley has been set up since that book was published, right? And the Silicon Valley was set up by the intelligence apparatus. So it was originally started as kind of a wing of the Rockefeller Eastern establishment intelligence agency wing of American politics, but it very much has an axis of its own at this point. Silicon Valley is its own axis, and there are times when Silicon Valley and Wall Street don't totally get along. But basically, I see the alignment as the Eastern establishment of New England and Silicon Valley against the majority of American capitalists. The majority of American millionaires and billionaires just want to make money, and they like Trump because Trump is pushing back the more managerial wing of, Wall Street oil bankers and tech monopolies. The tech monopolies and the big oil companies, they tend to be with the Democrats, and the rest of the ruling class tends to favor a more libertarian approach where they can maximize their profits. But Silicon Valley was a big game changer, right? The rise of Facebook and Twitter has really put Silicon Valley way ahead of the rest of the ruling class, right? That the amount of power they have in influencing the way people think is way bigger than the owner of some hotel chain, for example, has, right? And that the managerial wing of the ruling class has the upper hand at this point. The wing that favors, covert action to try and stabilize the United States, and prevent any kind of revolution or anything like that from breaking out, but also spread chaos around the world in order to secure the rule of Western monopoly corporations. That faction has the upper hand, mainly because of the computer revolution. But they're facing a very solid, layer of resistance of capitalists that don't want to pay higher taxes, of capitalists that just want to make profits and don't like the fact that the government is involved. I think most capitalists have a more or less libertarian approach, right? They got rich. Anyone else could get rich too if they just work hard enough, right? And they want the government to stay out, and they want free competition. But the richest of the rich, they're going to get the government monopoly anyway, right? So they're not worried about the government getting involved. Plus, they're thinking long term. What could possibly unseat them would be big social unrest, would be the rise of geopolitical rivals in the United States. They're thinking strategically and long term and managerially, and the rest of the ruling class is thinking about their own profits in the short term. During slavery, there was a debate among slave ship owners, and they argued about, should you pack the slave ships to full capacity and have all the slaves die, a number of the slaves die on the way to the United States, or should you not pack the ships to full capacity so that more of the slaves survived by the time you got back to the United States, right? And that was a big debate among the slave ship owners. Some of them said, pack the ship as tightly as you can, and some of them said, don't pack the ship as tight as you can. These are the kind of arguments the ruling class has among themselves, right? At the end of the day, their goal is maximizing their profits and ruling, but the question is, how do we do it? And do we have a long-term or short-term approach? How do we get what we want?
That's abhorrent. That's abhorrent.
But this is how the capitalists operate. And
Yeah.
this is the system that we live under, and ultimately the future of the working class is with neither faction. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be a strategic alliance at some point.
Right.
However, I'm at the point where I think that the relationship, the kind of attachment that socialists and leftists have to the Democratic Party and the Eastern establishment needs to break. Now, that doesn't mean aligning with Trump, but you never enter an alliance with somebody unless you have your own resources, right? I mean, Yeah, yeah, you know what I'm saying? You never enter an alliance unless you have enough of your own to go into that alliance, to actually be a partner in it, right? And the left is so weak, and actual Marxism is so weak, that entering an alliance with the Eastern establishment, with the Democratic National Committee, all it means is we're their foot soldiers. We don't have any say. We don't have any influence over how they do things, right? And they have made overwhelmingly clear they don't really want us. That's kind of what we were talking about before with Biden and all of that. So if you're a progressive and you're a socialist, I urge you to rethink the relationship with the Democratic Party. I argue that we need to get to the masses. It's the broad masses of people, average Americans who've never met a socialist, never met a communist, but are suffering economically right now. That's who we need to get to. And we urgently need to get to them, right? That's who we need to get to. We need to get to the broad masses of people. I've repeated the phrase over and over again, out of the movement to the masses. That's where we need to be, right? Average Americans who are living in Kansas and Iowa and New Hampshire and Mississippi and Alabama and Texas and San Diego and Sacramento who are suffering right now and are looking for answers need to turn to revolutionary scientific socialism for those answers. And that is the role that I see leftists playing in our time. And part of that means not only breaking with the Eastern establishment in Silicon Valley, but breaking with the synthetic left. Because, they look at the Antifa, Vosh fan club, people out in the streets breaking things and burning the American flag, and they don't want anything to do with that, right? Would you want that in your community, in your neighborhood? I mean, nobody would want that, right? And that, I wear a suit. I get a lot of flack for wearing a suit, but, I went in 2013 to the World Festival of Youth and Students in Quito, Ecuador. And I met with communists from Venezuela and communists from Angola and communists from India and communists from all over the world, places where they have millions of people who follow them and they control governments and have seats in governments and have labor unions and stuff. And, they were all wearing suits, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm sorry, but it's like, if we want to keep being bohemian, isolated fringe that go out and break things on cue when it starts lighting up on Twitter, well, there's no future in that for socialism. The future for socialism is getting to the masses, building real organizations that care for people and provide services to people, right? And build up a force of community power. And then from there can start to talk about how we transition to a socialist society.